gentlemen, please welcome today's guest speaker, Mr. Hideaki Kase, and Mr. Satoru Mizushima.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club. My name is James Sims, a member of the PAGE. Today, we have two guest speakers that are going to talk about the Yanfu or the comfort women issue in terms of the lawsuit that they've filed against the Asahi Shimbun. In the interim, we were talking about it, and I think they've gotten up to the number of plaintiffs is probably going to be over 24,000 people. And so today, on my immediate right, to your left, we have Mr. Hideaki Kase, who's chairman of the Society for the Dissemination of Historical Fact. He was educated at Keio, Yale, and Columbia, and served as a special advisor to Prime Ministers Fukuda and Nakasone. And he told me he's been a member of the press club since 1959. He said that he was probably the oldest member, but I told him he doesn't look that old, so I'm sure there are other members that are even older than him. So, and then to the immediate left is, let's see, Mr. Satoru Mizushima. He's known for directing the film Nanking no Shinjitsu, The Truth About Nanking, and he is the president of the Japan Cultural Channel Sakura TV channel, which is, I think, on cable as well as on the internet. And anyway, without any further ado, I would like to give a welcome to our guest speakers today. And I guess we'll go with Mr. Kase first? Okay. And then next will be Mr. Mizushima.
皆さんこんにちは。実は今回の朝日新聞に対する集団訴訟は、私、水島会長ですか、が一番の中心人物で、ですからいろいろ細かいことはいや大きなこともですね。はいはいはいはい。で、私はまずこの今日のですねプレスカンファレンスの、皆さんに差し上げたアナウンスメントについて一つですね、コンプレインしたいと思います。この中にですね、mainstream historians consider the issue of comfort women, women forced into servitude in Japanese military brothels in the 1930s and 40s, established historical fact って書いてありますけども、私は外国のアメリカの新聞に書くときに、ニューヨーク・タイムズですとか、ウォール・ストリート・ジャーナルズ、そういうところに書いたこともありますが、ニュースウィークなんかもですね、これはいつもヒストリアンと書かれますが、私は自分がメインストリームだと思っています。ですからこの Women Forced into Brussels がメインストリームヒストリアンズのヒストリアルファクツだと私は到底思いません。これは大きな間違いだと思います。それから最後にですね、私の紹介の中で、Chairman of the Society for the Dissemination of Historical Fact, which supports a revisionist view of 書いてありますが、皆さんは日本の戦後の歴史はご存知だと思いますけれども、日本がアメリカによって占領されて、アメリカ人たちによって今日に至るまでリビジョニスト・ヒストリーが押し付けられているんです。ですから私は決して、修正主義者だとは思っておりません。今この朝日どうぞ。
Hello, thank you very much. I would like to begin by explaining that in regard to this class action suit which has been brought against the Asahi Shimbun, I am not the central person. It is actually Mr. Mizushima sitting next to me, who is the president of the separate channel, who is the person that is most central to this lawsuit. So in regard to details, and in also regard to our larger issues about this lawsuit, please ask him. And Mr. Mizushima is also explaining that there's another gentleman named Mr. Shoichi Watanabe, who is the head of the organization that is sponsoring this lawsuit, bringing this lawsuit. However, I myself would like to make a complaint about the announcement for the press conference that we are holding today. There is a line that says that mainstream historians consider the issue of comfort women, women forced into servitude into Japanese military brothels in the 1930s and 40s, and established historical fact. However, when I write in U.S. publications such as the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, I am referred to as a historian, and I consider myself to be a mainstream historian. So in regard to this phrase, women forced into brothels, etc., I do not believe that this is established historical fact. I would also like to point out to another line in this introduction, this announcement to this press conference, which introduces myself as the chairman of the Society for the Dissemination of Historical Fact, which supports a revisionist view of history. As many of you know, the history of Japan after World War II, World War II was occupied by the U.S. forces, and until now it has basically been forced to accept a revisionist history that was created by the United States, the Allies. In other words, revisionist history was forced upon us. I do not consider myself a revisionist by any means.
それで今朝日に対する集団訴訟が23,000人を超している、超しておりますけれども、これをおそらくジャーナリズムに対する集団訴訟では歴史で一番大きなものだと考えております。ぜひ皆さん今日のことを大きく報道していただきたいと思います。ありがとうございます。
I was just at the end by making one comment. As was mentioned by Nancy a few moments ago, the number of persons who have entered the class action lawsuit against the Asahi Shimbun, the defendants, have reached over 23,000 people already. I believe that this is unprecedented in the history of lawsuits. I think this is the largest number of defendants in a lawsuit fighting a suit against media institution. Therefore, I hope the people of the media here today will broadcast and convey this news story in a very, very large way. Thank you.
And I forgot to introduce our interpreter today, Ms. Nakamatsu. And so now it's Mr. Mizushima.
ご紹介いただきました水島です。この集団訴訟についてまずお話ししたいと思います。今、加瀬先生から、23,000人の人が今、原告に、加わったということでありますが、他にもですね、あと2つ、2,000人の人たちが原告となって訴えた、朝日新聞を訴えた裁判があります。それから400人だと思いますけれども、そのくらいの数の人たちがまた朝日新聞を訴えた裁判が、ございます。まず、この3つ、多くの人たちが朝日新聞に対する、裁判を起こしたということであります。
I've just been introduced. My name is Mizushima, and I would like to first begin to speak a little bit about this lawsuit. As was explained by Mr. Kasi a few moments ago, already 23,000 people, more than 23,000 people have listed themselves as defendants in this suit. I would also like to point out, however, that this is not the only lawsuit that is being brought against the Asahi Shimbun. There are two others. One has over 2,000 plaintiffs, and the other has approximately 400 plaintiffs. And excuse me, let me say before. before there are 23,000 plaintiffs in our case. So what I want to point out is that many people are suing this newspaper.
そして、私たちの2万3000人以上の裁判は23名の高池弁護士、荒木田弁護士、尾崎弁護士をはじめとする23名の弁護団が中心となって進められていきます。
I would also like to explain that in addition to the 23,000 plus plaintiffs that we are seeing in our lawsuit, we have been supported by a team of lawyers of 23 persons, beginning with the lawyer Mr. Takaike, Mr. Ozeki, etc.
そして、学者、ジャーナリスト、さまざまな文化人、含めまして、120名以上の皆さんが代表呼びかけ人という形で原告団に加わっています。
In addition to this, we have over 120 persons who are leaders in their respective fields, whether in fields of academic studies, or whether they're journalists, or they're persons working in the cultural fields. They have listed themselves as what we call representatives or promoters of this lawsuit.
そしてこの2万3000人の原告団はいわゆるよく言われるようなライトウィングとかですね、そういう人たちではありません。ごく普通の日本国民であり市民であります。
I would also like to point out that when you hear the number 23,000 people or more, you may think that these plaintiffs are often referred to as right-wingers, but that is not the case. These are normal, average persons. They are Japanese, regular Japanese citizens.
かくいう私も別に右翼でもありませんし、いわゆる歴史修正主義者でもありません。
I would also like to clarify, I myself am not a right-winger, neither am I a historical revisionist.
コンサバティブな人間といえば、それは肯定します。
If someone were to refer to me as conservative, I would agree to that description myself.
今回の朝日新聞の訴訟は、歴史修正主義といったイデオロギーや理念で語ってもらいたくないと思っております。
In regard to this Asahi newspaper, Asahi Shimbun and lawsuit, when you write about this story or when you discuss this story or present this story, I hope you will not present it in the light or from the point of view of historical revisionism.
私たちが求めているのは歴史の真実でありまして、ですね。
What we are seeking to realize is to find the historical truth of things, to find the truth of history, not to revise history.
だから、いわゆるこの従軍慰安婦問題、問題なのは、戦場に慰安婦がいるのは、今もそうですし、売春がいるというのは今もそうでありますが、当時これが一番問題だったのは強制的に朝鮮人の人たち、女性が、慰安婦にさせられたか、これが一番問題だったと思います。
In other words, this brings us to the heart of the matter, which is the problem of, in the Japanese word is Jugun Yanfu, which literally translated is military comfort women. In other words, when we look at throughout history and even today, if you look at any battlefield, there are always comfort women or prostitutes. However, the biggest problem concerning this issue was that there was the added concept of forced taking away or forced women, Korean women being forced to become these women.
朝日新聞は32年間にわたって吉田誠二という、嘘をつく人、詐欺師と私たちは言っておりますけど、この、吉田誠二という人の証言をジャーナリズムとして検証しないまま、報道しました。
What we feel is most problematic about what the Asahi Shimbun has done is that over 32 years they presented the words of a man named Seiji Yoshida. We describe him as a person who does not tell the truth, who is a liar. In fact, we go as far as to call him a fraudulent person, a con artist. But they took his words and without fulfilling their journalistic duties to verify the facts of his words, they went ahead and printed his words as though they were fact.
その強制というのは、朝鮮人の家庭に日本の兵隊が、入り込んで、乱入して、 そして嫌がる女性を引っ張ってトラックに入れて連れ去ったというような、とんでもない、嘘でした。
The idea of being forcibly taken away is more vivid than the words might suggest. According to the testimony that he gave, the image that was given was that Japanese soldiers burst into Korean homes and forcibly took away young women who were very much resisting, forced them into trucks and drove them to the battlefield to become women. It is very much an astounding and unforgivable lie.
それは最終島、チェジュ島という島で行われたと吉田誠司は証言しましたけれども、それは韓国の人たちによっても全面否定されました。
He gave vivid descriptions of particular incidents in a place called Jeju Island, which is part of the Korean territory. However, South Korean persons have 100% denied that such things took place.
こういう、嘘があった。これは事実を言えば朝鮮人の世間、世間というのは、仲介役というか、人買い商人ですね。世間によってお金が払われ、お父さんお母さんに、そして娘は、接待をするだけだよと言いながら連れてかれたというのが現実でした。
This was very much a lie. What actually occurred was that Korean persons, the term uses again, but they seem to be financial mediators, actually paid money to the parents of young women and basically did not tell them the truth, saying simply that you just have to show hospitality to your customers.
そういった子が慰安婦というか売春婦になっていったわけであります。
So the word in Japanese is settai, which means hospitality, which gives the impression of just being someone who is there to help serve during a dinner or serve during a dinner or some kind of meal. But these are young women who were eventually deceived and became public women or prostitutes.
そういう意味で言いますと、例えば最近まで韓国、2004年まで韓国はキーセンという国営の売春、組織がありました。
In that sense, until very recently, until 2004, in South Korea, there was a system called Kisen, which was basically an organization that allowed for national prostitution, or national-run prostitution.
というのがキーセンというのがありました。ついこの間まで、非常に最近まで国が運営する売春組織が2004年だったと思いますけれどもありました。
So I want to again explain that until recently, and I believe it was until 2004, that there was an organization, a prostitution organization that was actually run by the government of South Korea.
そしてこれがまさにコンフォートウーマンと言われる人たちです。
And I think these are the women who would be called comfort women.
で韓国政府も認めておりますけれども、女性の比率の中で一番売春婦の、比率の多いのが韓国政府であります。韓国であります。
So I think even the South Korean government would acknowledge this, but of the women who were considered to be comfort women, the largest proportion were from South Korea.
今、世界中に20万人以上、一説には30万人と言われておりますが、海外で外国人売春婦が20万人から30万人働いていると言われており、日本でも5万人の韓国人売春婦が日本で働いている、という現実があります。これは韓国政府が認めた数字です。現在です。
What I'm talking about is not historical, not historical matters, but what is happening today. There are many different estimates as to the number of such comfort women who are working abroad. The numbers range from 200,000 to even as high as 300,000. These are women who are working abroad in the prostitution business. It is said that even in Japan there are some 50,000 women from South Korea who are working in this profession.
私たちは、この裁判に話は戻りますけれども、そういった歴史を修正するのではなく、歴史の事実の正しいことを世界中にアピールしたいというふうに思っているし、朝日新聞はそれと全く逆の日本の国民と日本国を貶める、恥ずかしめる、こういった報道をした、嘘報道をしたということです。これは私たちは国民として許すことができないと同時に、私たちの今何も言うことのできない先祖の皆さん、それに代わってもこの朝日新聞の嘘報道をきちんと世界中にもアピールさせなければいけない。朝日は読者に所在するだけではなく、世界中の新聞やテレビに私たちは嘘をつきました、嘘報道をしましたと、こういうことをきちんと謝罪訂正させなければならない、それが今回の裁判のメインの目的であります。
So I will go back to talking about the lawsuit. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are not trying to revise history. We are trying to make the truth of history known to the world at large. What we are trying to do is exactly the opposite of what the Asahi Shimbun has been doing for many, many years. In other words, the Asahi Shimbun has worked hard over the past decades to basically humiliate the nation of Japan and the Japanese citizens, and they have done this by telling these terrible lies and promoting them as actual truth. Some of the things that I've said have been very severe, but as a Japanese, I cannot forgive what the Asahi Shimbun has done, and I also cannot forgive the fact that they have humiliated the memory of our ancestors who are no longer around to be able to speak up for themselves and to defend themselves. So I believe, therefore, that it is not enough for the Asahi newspaper to have simply apologized and retracted its articles to its subscribers. It must go further than that. It must apologize to the world and explain to the world through television, through newspapers, that it has broadcast and provided lies in its articles.
はい、そういうことで私たちは、訴訟を起こしたわけであります。この後、私たちは裁判をと同時に100万人の朝日新聞を正すというか休刊することですね、正す、署名運動、100万人署名運動を全国的に展開をしていく予定であります。あと時間がなくなりましたので、全然最後まで。
Yes, I think Mr. Cousin was just one thing you wanted to add.
So this is the reason that I brought this lawsuit. Sometimes what happens in real life and what happens in history is very hard to bear, but we do want to have the truth come out. That's why we decided to file this lawsuit. We are also going to be starting very soon another campaign, which is to collect over 1 million signatures to denounce the Asahi newspaper. So I've run out of time, but if Mr. Kase has anything else to add?
今、水島社長が、この吉田という人が、日本の兵士たちが、朝鮮の若い娘たちを、暴力で拉致してさらって売春婦にしたと、それを朝日新聞が、これを大きな記事としてきたと、言われましたけども、一言ですね、実はこの吉田証言が全く正しくなかったということを朝日新聞がこの間、社長の記者会見で認めた、でそれを受けて我々が訴訟をしているということを水島社長がちょっと一言言われるのを落としてしまいましたので付け加えます。
So I would also like to add one thing. Mr. Shima has explained in detail about what the Asahi Shimbun has done, primarily that they took the words of a man named Mr. Seiji Yoshida, who wrote as his own, who said as his own testimony, has his own experiences, that he had seen Japanese soldiers basically violently break into Chinese, Korean homes, take away violently young women against their will, and force them to become convict women. these articles, his testimony was presented in very large and prominent articles in the Asahi newspaper. However, as you know, last year the president of the Asahi newspaper gave a press conference where he acknowledged that the testimony of Mr. Seiji Yoshida was untrue. He acknowledges, and that is the basis on which we have filed our lawsuit.
Okay. Okay, thank you. We'd like to go to questions to the working press first. And please keep it to one question, because I imagine there are going to be a fair number of questions, and no speeches. And I also forgot, if you haven't turned your cell phone onto our camera or off, please do so. Okay, so questions from the working press, please, first.
From Italy, Sky TG24. I think the opportunity of having you two guys here, who are not rightists, not Ryoku, not particularly litigations, just keeper of the right records, to make a question, a related question, not on the specifically on the conflict issue, but I would like you to comment on the fact that Japan has not yet solved its territorial conflicts with Russia, China, Taiwan, Korea. It's the only country that after the war has yet very important and serious territorial issues. I speak as an Italian, and we know what we are talking about, because we did solve this with Austria, Libya. Would you tell us, in your opinion, who's the responsibility? I guess, of course, of the single country I mentioned, China, Korea, but do you think also that the Japanese governments and diplomats have absolutely no capability to strike a deal?
はい、イタリアのスカイテレビ24からでございます。今日お二人は右翼ではなく、やはりその正しいその事実を広くしてもらいたいということで来られたんでございますので、今日私は慰安婦についてではなく、ちょっと関連した質問について聞きたいと思います。日本はいまだに戦後いくつかの領土問題というのを抱えているわけでございます。相手国としては中国、台湾、ロシア、韓国などがあるわけでございます。戦後唯一まだその領土問題解決してないような問題を抱えている国にあります。私はイタリアで出身でございますけど、イタリアもいろいろ苦労したので非常に大変な問題だというのもよく分かっているわけでございますが、私の質問はこの領土問題が解決してないのはなぜであるか、誰の責任であるか、もちろんその相手国中国などにも責任があると思うのでございますが、日本政府の方でも何か問題があるのでしょうか。例えばその日本の外交能力が不十分であるとか、そういうようなことでございますでしょうか。
正確に言います。一つ今、尖閣諸島の問題がございますけれども、これは、はっきりしてるんですけれども、1969年の中国の政府、日本でいうと国土地理院という、日本でいうですね、中国のそういう地図を作る、そういうお役所がはっきりと1969年の時点です。尖閣諸島は日本領とはっきりと明記しています。今地図帳を抹殺しようとしておりますけれども、1969年まで翌年、国連の資源調査があって、あそこに地下資源がありそうだと分かった直後から中国政府は尖閣諸島を自分の国の領土だと主張し始めている。今のこういう不当なことを始めております。だから日本政府としては竹島もあるいは、尖閣諸島も、国際司法裁判所に提訴したいと、応じてくれればいくらでも我々立ち上がると言ってますけれども、中国政府も韓国政府も、こういう形で応じようとしていない、こういう状態でありまして、外交努力がもちろん不足していたかも分かりませんけれども、不当な領土侵略が行われようとしている。ロシアも、敗戦後、我々の国が戦争に負けてから、侵入してきたソ連軍が、 北方領土、あそこを占領したということであります。もともと北方領土といっても、北方四島は北海道に属した形の領土であったわけで、不当な占領、侵略行為によって奪われているということで、外交的なものよりはむしろ敗戦の無力化した状態の時、侵略をされたということだと考えるべきだと思っております。
I will make a few comments. First of all, in regard to the Senkaku Islands issue, what is very, very clear, again, this is historical fact, is that in 1969, there was an agency of the government, the literal translation would be the National Territories or National Territories Geography Agency. In other words, it is the official government organization that was in charge of making maps. And according to the map that was made in 1969, it is clearly indicated that the Senkaku Islands belonged to Japan. And of course, copies of this map are now trying to be eradicated by the Chinese government. But in the following year, an organization belonging to the United Nations did some research about natural resources in this area, and they came up with the conclusion that this area might be rich in natural resources underneath the ocean floor. And so as a result of that conclusion, since that point, the Chinese government has been claiming territorial rights over the Senkaku Islands. However, we believe that since this was a complete change from what the Chinese government had been taking, the decision that they had been taking the previous year, this is the word that has been used is futo, which is illegal or unjust claims. A similar thing can be said for the Takeshima Island. This is something that we are disputing ownership with South Korea. We have asked both China and South Korea to take both issues, the Senkaku Island issues and the Takeshima Island issues, for judgment to the International Court of Justice. However, both countries have refused to bring these cases before that court. So what you have said about maybe diplomatic efforts being somehow lacking, maybe that is one part of the issue. However, if the other nation takes these kinds of illegal or unjust actions, it is very difficult to counter with simply diplomatic measures. This brings me to the idea of Russia. As you know, after the war had ended, Russia or the Soviet Union at that time entered what we consider to be illegally, because Japan had already lost the war, entered the area that we call the Northern Territories. Although they were called the Northern Territories, these four islands originally belonged to Hokkaido, and we believe that the Soviet Union basically came in and took these islands by force. So I think rather than a lack of diplomatic efforts on Japan's part, it was that Japan was powerless, having just suddenly lost the war, and therefore was unable to basically hold on to its territories. The question is being raised that it doesn't have anything to do, it doesn't really have much to do with today's...
Well, it is related to history, so anyway, the questions are coming from the working press. So if we have time, we can go to associate members and other members. But during the meantime, it's regular press members only. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。歴史に関係する質問だったということでございますので、申し訳ないんでございますが、とりあえず記者からの質問を最初にお聞きしたいと思いますので、その後時間がありましたら、他の総裁とにも何かの質問をお聞きいたします。
Michael Penn, the core argument that you seem to be making about the Asahi Shimbun is that they're damaging Japan's reputation in the international sphere. And you're arguing basically that there's a misperception of history. My question to you is that it seems from my understanding that the messages which the Asahi Shimbun is sending are relatively well received internationally, whereas the messages that you are sending tend to get a lot of negative reactions from the international public. So my question to you is, if the core contention is that it's the Asahi Shimbun that is damaging the international reputation of Japan, how do you explain the fact that messages such as yours seem to be received much more negatively than their messages?
新越ニュースエージェンシーの件でございます。今お話を聞いておりますと、基本的に皆様方のお考えといたしましては、朝日新聞は日本のイメージを、悪くしている、特にその国際社会において非常にその、日本のイメージをさしているということでございます。そして、歴史、の、誤認するような報道を、してきたというお話だと思うのでございますが、私の印象なんでございますが、朝日新聞が出す報道といいますのは、国際社会はかなりポジティブに受け入れてきたという気がいたします。そして、大変恐縮なんでございますが、皆さんからするようなメッセージといいますのは、国際社会は非常にネガティブに、どっちかというとネガティブに受け止めているというふうに思うのでございます。ですので、冒頭に申し上げましたように、朝日新聞のその出す報道が日本のイメージをその毀損している、悪くしているということでございましたら、なぜ皆様の方のメッセージの方がその国際社会がその批判的に受け止めていると思われますでしょうか。
これでですね、国際社会とか、そういった抽象的な言葉をお使いになっていただきたくないと思います。例えばアメリカのメディアとか、アメリカの主流のメディアというのでしたら、私は、あるいはヨーロッパだったらうなずけますが、しかしこれはですね、皆さんの中に日本に来てられるアメリカ、ヨーロッパの記者の方も日本について全く無知で不勉強なんです。それが一番大きな原因だと思います。私たちのこれは責任ではありません。
When you use words such as international society or international community, I would ask, please, that you do not use such vague and ambiguous phrases. If you can be more specific, for example, if you say the television or media in the United States or Europe or certain areas of Europe, I can certainly understand what you mean by that. I think one of the biggest problems is that even among many of you assembled here today, among the journalists from, for example, the United States and Europe, unfortunately there are many who are quite ignorant and perhaps have not studied enough about Japan. That is the biggest problem, and for us it is a very serious problem, but it is not something that is our fault.
今のマイケルさんのことですけれども、基本的にですね、朝日新聞は、戦後 GHQ、占領軍の司令部がですね、敗戦から9日目に発禁処分をして、そこから完全に、占領軍の、司令部のですね GHQ の、ほとんどそういう意図のもとに動き出したのがそのまま現在まで続いているとまず、私たちは見ております。
I would like, first of all, to say in regard to the Asahi newspaper, as you know, immediately after the war, the occupation forces stepped in, GHQ, General Headquarters, which was the headquarters of the occupation forces, 9 days after they took control of the country, put out an order which forbade the publishing of newspapers, and I believe a similar situation has continued for many years since that time.
極端に聞こえるかも分かりませんけれども、そのメインは日本人というのは残虐で野蛮で、そして武器を、兵器を持たせれば何をするかわからない、女性に対しては、強制連行というかですね、そういう拉致をして、性奴隷にしてしまう、こういった、形の報道を朝日新聞はしてきました。しかし、一回止めた方がいいですか。
What I'm saying, and I know this sounds quite extreme, however, please try to understand what we are saying. We believe that since the Asahi newspaper has began publication again after the war, the general tone of the articles was to present an image of Japanese people as being fundamentally cruel by nature, as being barbaric, as being a race of people that if you put weapons in their hands, you would have no idea what would happen. In other words, it would go out of control. Especially in regard to women, the image was presented as there being the men being very, very violent and forcibly abducting, taking away women, and forcing them to become sex slaves. This is the kind of reporting that the Asahi Shimbun has been doing for decades.
そういう報道を今日までしてきましたし、それが皆さんも日本にお住みになってですね、分かるのは、日本人は大変そんな野蛮でも残酷でもない、あるいはなんていうんですか、女性を不当に扱っているわけでもない、むしろ日本の女性は大変強い女性である、男の方が逆にある意味で言うと言うことを聞いている、というようなもちろん職場とかさまざまな場所に働きに出ている女性は少ないかもわからないが、実際の日本人の家庭のコントロールしているのはむしろ奥様であると、女性であると、そういったある種の、独特の文化を持っている国であります。皆さんが見ていて日本人がどんな人たちかというのは本当はお分かりになると思います。
So this is kind of a broadcasting, this is the kind of reportage or the image that has been presented by the Asahi newspaper for decades and decades. But for those of you who have lived in Japan for some time, I think you know from your experiences that Japanese people are not barbaric and they're not fundamentally cruel. And in regard to women, they don't act in an unjust or illegal or violent way. In fact, Japanese women, if anything, are rather quite tough and quite strong, and they very much are able to guide men and tell them what to do, and men basically are very docile and obedient in that regard. Of course, in the workplace, there are fewer women than in other nations. However, in the home, it is very much the wives that control everything. And that is a very, very unique culture to Japan. And I think those of you who've lived here for some time understand that these are the kinds of people that live in Japan.
今言ったように日本人のその、あり方は皆さんご存知だと思いますけれども、よくお分かりいただけると思います。そういう中で、例えば一つ例を挙げます。日本は、広島、長崎で30万人の民間人大多数が大虐殺されました。それから世界の歴史に初めて一晩で10万人が、東京大空襲という形で殺されました。それも民間人、周りからだんだんと周りにまず円を描くように落としてだんだんと縮めていく、絶滅を願ったような狙ったようなそういった東京大空襲、200数十万人の人たちが民間人が爆撃によって殺されました。無差別。その中でも日本人はアメリカと大変今仲良くしております。アメリカ人を憎んだりアメリカ人を責めたりしておりません。そういう国民性が日本であります。そしてもう一つ、ロシアというかソ連でしたけども、終戦後多くの60万と言われる人たちがシベリアに送られて強制連行されて、そして、最小少なく見積もっても、6万人、もっと実際は多いと思います。こういう人たちが寒さと飢えの中で強制労働で殺されました。私たちはそれに対しても賠償を要求したりとかそういうことはありません。日本人はそういう、いろんなことに対して大変寛容で、そして虐殺やあるいはむやみな殺生、人殺しやそういうものを嫌う国民です。そのことを、全くこの現実を無視して日本人が大変危険な存在である、もっと言えば安倍総理も危険な存在であると、レビジョニストというかですね、歴史修正主義者あるいはライトウィングという形で非難しているのが残念ながらはっきり言いますが日本にいる皆さんだと思います。非常に私たちは残念だし、怒りすら覚える。本当のことを伝えていただきたい。日本の本当のこと、真実を伝えるのが皆さんの本当は責任であり義務であると思いますが、残念ながら東京にいる皆さんは朝日新聞と同じような イデオロギー色に満ちたそういった報道しかしていない。大変私は悲しんでおります。
I think Mr. Kase got something about interpretation first.
As I've just described, those of you who have been in Japan for some time, you understand the true nature of Japanese people, and I think you will agree with my description as I just said. I think you understand all of these things. But just to give you some examples, as you know, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the two atomic bombs killed around 300,000 people. Most of these were civilians. It was a huge massacre of human beings. And also, for the first time in history, during the Tokyo air raids, more than 100,000 people died in a single night. And these were air raids that were designed to kill as many people as possible, including civilians, because you look at the pattern of the bombing and you see that they started out with the bombs falling in a very large circle, and then the concentric circles became smaller and smaller and smaller, ensuring that no one could escape. It is said that over 2 million civilians were killed in this very, very terrible way. However, even in regard to the atomic bombs or in regard to the Tokyo air raids, the Japanese people have not continued to harbor tremendous resentment and anger and fury at the United States. Rather, they consider them friends and colleagues. That is the nature of the Japanese personality. If I'm talking about the Soviet Union again, after the war, it is estimated that some 600,000 Japanese were taken. And in this case, I think the word forcibly taken away could be used. They were taken to Siberia, forced to work for free, and basically given very little food and very little warmth. And as a result, it is said that by conservative estimates, of the 600,000 people, some 60,000 died from hunger and from the cold. Again, Japan has not harbored tremendous resentment toward the Soviet Union for this. They have not demanded compensation for this. This is the nature of the Japanese people. The Japanese people are fundamentally very tolerant. They don't like violence. They don't like the killing of people. And I think, again, I repeat, those of you who have lived in Japan for some time know that this is the true nature and personality of the Japanese people. And yet, the messages that are being sent abroad is that the Japanese people are fundamentally by nature somehow different, that they're fundamentally dangerous. And a very specific example is now being given with Prime Minister Abe. He's being portrayed as someone who is very potentially dangerous, someone who is labeled as historically a revisionist person. And to be honest, and this, I know these are harsh words, but those of you who live in Japan, who know the Japanese, I think it is your responsibility, your obligation, your job to actually portray the true image of Japanese abroad. However, you have not done so, and this is something that fills me with tremendous anger. I think that most of your reporting, in spite of the fact that you know what the true nature of Japanese people are, is you still write stories and present features based on ideological lines similar to the Asahi Shimbun. That is something that fills me with anger and tremendous sadness.
私は映画監督でもありまして、南京の真実という、南京大虐殺は、これは、フィクションであると、こういった映画を作りました。ぜひ皆さんにもご覧いただ英語版もございますのでご覧いただきたいと思いますけれども、まず一つだけたくさん言うことはできませんので言っておきますと、日本の歴史の中で、一つの都市やそういう、多数のものを大虐殺する何万人も、何十万人も殺すような、例えばカルタゴですね、ローマ帝国時代カルタゴのようなそういう例は日本の古代の歴史から今日まで、ありません。戦争の中でお互いに殺し合いはあっても、住民を、虐殺したりその町全部を大虐殺するようなそういった、文化も伝統も日本人にはありません。日本の歴史にそういうことがありません。南京大虐殺は完全に中国のプロパガンダですし、東京裁判で持ち出されたことでございますが、これは今日時間がないので細かいことはお話しできませんが、一つその歴史の例として日本人には敵も味方も全員殺してしまうような 町中全体を殺すようなそういった、虐殺の習慣はないということを、これだけちょっと、言っておきたいと思います。
As was introduced, I am a film director, and I did direct a film called The Truth of Nanking, and it is available, so please, please, if you can, take an opportunity to look at it. And the theme of this film is that the Nanking Massacre is a fictitious concept. I want to really actually talk in much more detail about that, but I can't, so because I'm limited for time. But I would like to make one point, which is that when you look back through Japanese history, to even very, very ancient times, we do not have, as part of our tradition, or as part of our custom, as part of our history, this concept of killing massive numbers of people, in the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, civilians, or, for example, destroying a particular city, the way the Roman Empire destroyed Carthage many, many years ago. We don't have that kind of tradition. Certainly, many, many people died actually on the battlefield during a war situation, but the idea of destroying a city so that nothing remains, killing massive numbers of civilians, that is not something that is part of our history or tradition. It is the Nanking Massacre is an idea that was basically fictitious, that was created as propaganda by the Chinese government. It first came up in the Tokyo tribunals, I wish I could give you more historical examples, but there is nothing in our history where we kill an entire huge number of people, enemies, collaborators, etc., into extinction. That is simply just not part of our nature.
Hey, before we go to Mr. Kase, but Mizushima-san, Mizushima, I think you have a second follow-up to the Nanking movie, so maybe you can come talk about that when it comes out. Anyway, I know Mr. Kase had some other comments.
一言だけ、日本は歴史を通じてスレイブリーが全く存在しなかった文化です。ですから私は特にアメリカのですね、つい19世紀の後半まで奴隷制があった国からですね、セックス・スレイブスとかなんとか言われたくないと思います。それにですね、日本には宗教構想、例えばキャトリックとプロテスタントがこう際限なく殺し合うような宗教対立も宗教構想も存在しませんでした。ですから多くのこの外国のジャーナリストの方々が日本について全く無知で、それでいい加減なことをですね、触れ回ってるから日本の評判が悪くなっている面が私は大変大きいと思って、ぜひですね、皆さん日本についてもっと勉強していただきたいと思います。
So I would also like to explain that throughout Japanese history, the concept of slavery has fundamentally never existed. It is not part of our culture, and that makes me even doubly angry when people from the United States, a nation which had slavery until the late 19th century, refers to some of our actions and says that we had sex slaves. I do not believe that we should be criticized by such persons, people from such culture. I would also like to point out that Japan is unusual, separate from many other nations, is that we have never had religious wars. For example, the long-going strife and conflicts between Catholics and Protestants, for example. That is not something that is part of our history. So again, I go back to an earlier point, and I know it sounds very harsh, and I apologize for that, but I believe that the problem that the reason that Japan has such a negative image abroad, much of the cause lies with many of you here, the foreign journalists who have been active in Japan. You have not studied enough about Japan. You remain, unfortunately, too ignorant about many things about Japan, and I believe that is a very, very large reason why Japan has such a negative image. So I appeal to you, please study more about this nation and its history.
I mean, I think Japan has a fairly good image abroad, especially after 3/11. I think that's the point of talking about the social cohesion and the lack of any sort of breakdown of it. But anyway, Teddy had a question.
私もただ一言申し上げたいんですけれど、3月11日の後に報道を見ましても、実は日本は非常に素晴らしいイメージを持っているのではないかというふうに思います。やっぱり日本の社会を互いとして合うっていう、そういう文化を持っている素晴らしい国民だっていう海外の報道がたくさんあったと思います。
テリ ベイジンロードビリーニュースは見ては少し新聞ジャーナリスト先生方に日本語で質問させていただきます。先生方のご講説は出てまいりました。ただ今回は記者会損害賠償請求に関する記者会見ということなので、その訴訟についてお願いします。今回その訴状を見るとですね、基本的に朝日の一連のこの報道がここにありますように、日本国及び日本国民の国際的評価を著しく低下させたということが、訴えの根底にあると。ということは、裁判ではその朝日の報道が実際に日本の国際的な評価を著しく低めた、難しめたということを、主張し、なおかつ立証しなきゃいけないと思いますが、そこをどのような形で証明しようと思われているのか、それからもう一点お願いします。水島所長も先ほど、自分の保守だというお話をされていましたが、今回ですね、その裁判所の決定を仰ぐことの目的が何なのか、つまり、言論では、誰でも反論をされているわけですし、朝日もすでにもう間違いを認めているわけですよね。そこにあえて、その裁判所が、お墨付きとは変ですけれども、裁判所が、あなたたちが正しいよっていうふうに言ってもらうことの、意味というのは、何なんでしょうか。よろしくお願いします。
その2つ関連すると思うんですけれども、国際的な評価の問題ですけれども、そうか。
So I have two quick questions. I understand your different arguments and your different viewpoints, but I would like to talk about the lawsuit because that is the point of this press conference today. You said that, first of all, the Asahi newspaper has drastically lowered the image of Japan in the international community because of its reporting. The image, lowered the image or damaged the image of Japanese and the Japanese nation as well. How are you going to prove that Asahi Shimbun did this? And the second question is that you've said that you are conservative and you have spoken out about your beliefs, and I think because I should apologize, there are many ways to express one's points of views. Why have you turned to the courts? In other words, how would a positive, for example, decision from a verdict from the courts help your cause in some way?
前の質問と後ろの質問がかなり重なるところあるんですけど、まず一つ、裁判の中でですね、事実関係というものをまず明らかにしたい。そしてこの私たちが主張する事実と、朝日新聞が行ってきた報道とその事実、そして、訂正と謝罪はしましたが、これは私たちは極めて不十分というかですね、ごまかしと我々は考えております。これを、公の場、いわゆる司法の場において、つまり日本人がひどいことをやりましたよと強制連行して、そして制度例にしたかのような報道がずっとされてきて、それが、32年間続いてきたということですから、まず事実関係をきちんと、明らかにさせる裁判の場でですね、いうことでありまして、それが、国際的な、誤解とかそういうものを生んできたわけですから、そこをきちんと裁判の中で事実関係を本当の事実を明らかにするというのがまず目的です。そうすれば結果として今言ったように国際的な評価とかこういうものは変わっていくだろうということをまず考えているわけであります。それから、どうやって証明するか、はい、だからそれも今ダブってるって言ったのは事実関係をきちんとね明らかにするということです。例えば一つだけ例を挙げておきます。これは裁判に出すかどうかは別ですけれども、吉田誠二という人はいわゆるチェジュ島の慰安婦の強制連行というだけではなく、今ロシアはサハリンと言ってますけれども、樺太へですね朝鮮人を強制連行した労働のために、こういう報道も実はしております。しかしこれはまだ朝日新聞はこれを訂正謝罪しておりません。同じ吉田証言と吉田誠二の証言ですけれども、こういうことも含めて極めてメディアとしても不誠実で、かつまたこれはどうせまた明らかになってきますけれども、また謝罪しなければいけなくなると思いますけれども、そういうことですから、今言ったようにですね、事実関係を法廷の中でも明らかにしていくということが何よりの目的でありまして、お金が、一応傷つけられたとかいろんな問題で1人1万円ということを言っておりますが、お金の問題ではなく心の問題、日本人の名誉と誇りの問題、あるいはもっと言えば日本国そのものの誇りの問題で 誇りを取り戻す、そして国際的にもそうではなかったんだと、一番海外では有名だと言われている朝日新聞があれはプロパガンダ新聞だったんだということを、証明していきたいということであります。
So the two questions seem to basically overlap. Our main purpose in bringing this case before courts is that we want to clarify the truth. As I've said repeatedly, we want the truth to come out. In other words, we want to compare before the courts in a very public place the articles that were presented by the facts that were presented by the Asahi Shimbun compared to the facts as we have researched it, and to see what is the actual truth. We also further believe that although the Asahi Shimbun has retracted its past articles and apologized, we believe that these apologies and retractions are completely insufficient. They are almost basically a way for Asahi to just sort of weasel out of doing a real apology. That's why we believed it was important to bring them to a very public place, and the most public place of all is a court of law. After all, what the Asahi Shimbun has done for the past 32 years is very, very serious. It has presented Japanese people as being people who force women to become sex slaves. And they have repeated these articles, this kind of reporting for over 3 decades. And it is because of their sticking to these articles that the Japanese people and the Japanese nation have had such a misunderstanding by the international community about their true nature. In other words, again, I go back to this idea of we need to go back to the truth of the matter. And I believe that once the truth comes out in a court case, then the image that Japan has and the Japanese people have abroad will also change. And if I were to go further, I don't know if this will actually be something that we will present during the court case. So far, all of the attention has been about Mr. Seiji Yoshida's articles, testimonies in regard to the forced taking away of the comfort woman. However, there are other areas that he has touched upon that he has been quoted in the Asahi newspaper. For example, there is the idea of his being witness to the taking away of persons as forced labor to Sakhalin, which back then was known as Karafto. In other words, there were people, according to his testimony, Koreans or people from the Korean Peninsula were forcibly taken away to work in Sakhalin. Again, this is not something that has been touched upon or mentioned at all by the Asahi newspaper, so we think it is a very insincere approach that they are taking. So again, this is something that may or may not be brought up during this court case, but it is something that eventually we must deal with because it is a very, very, again, mistaken testimony that has led to mistaken understanding. This lawsuit is only about seeking the truth. It is not about money. We have, for the purposes of our court case, demanded 10,000 yen per person as compensation for having been wounded psychologically. However, this court case is not about money. It is about retrieving the honor and pride and the heart of the Japanese nation and of the Japanese people. After all, it is time for what is considered to be the most famous Japanese newspaper abroad, the Asahi Shimbun, to come forward and say, we have lied.
Mr. Kase had something to add.
私がこの集団訴訟に加わってその一員になった理由を申し上げますと、朝日新聞はこれまで有害なですね、ポイゾナスな報道をもうたくさん行ってきました。2つだけ挙げますと、1つはキム・ヨンソン金日成の時代に、朝鮮民主主義人民共和国が労働者の天国だと、毎日書いて、でそのために10万人以上の在日朝鮮人が7000以上の日本人妻を連れて北朝鮮という地獄に帰って、そして戻ってくることができないでいます。これは一つ。それから毛沢東の、人民大革命の人民文化大革命の、時に、中国が素晴らしい国であるということを毎日書いたと。で今回の慰安婦の報道もそうですが、私たちがこの集団訴訟を行うことによってこれから朝日新聞はこういった報道を行うときに から注意するだろう、非常に臆病になるだろう。だからその、教訓を与えるためにも私は、この集団訴訟、が成功することを願ってその一員となっております。
I would just like to add one point. The reason that I decided to join this class action suit against the Asahi newspaper is that I believe that this newspaper has been producing what I would call poisonous, toxic reports for many, many years. I do not have time, so I would just give you two examples. One is during the tenure of Kim Il-sung in the DPRK, the Democratic Republic of Korea. The Asahi newspaper presented many, many articles describing the DPRK as a heaven for laborers, for workers. And as a result of this kind of reporting, over 100,000 what we call zainichi, persons of Korean descent living in Japan, returned or went to the Korean Peninsula, went to North Korea, taking with them some 7,000 Japanese wives. The reality there was not heaven but rather hell, and yet they found that they could not return to Japan, and they suffered a great deal as a result. Another example of this kind of mistaken or toxic or poisonous reporting is during the People's Cultural Revolution under Mao Zedong. During that time, the Asahi newspaper reported on a daily basis that China was a wonderful nation. So what I'm saying is that I joined this lawsuit because the Asahi Shinbun has made many, many erroneous and toxic reports in the past. And if they think of trying to do something like that in the future, if they know that there is this kind of a lawsuit that might again occur, they will be perhaps more circumspect, more cautious, and perhaps a little bit more afraid to do that kind of reporting. That is why I joined this lawsuit, and I hope it will succeed.
Okay, I think we've actually run over on time. The staff is, I think, waiting me to...
James, just one very quick it's a follow-up to the first question. I would like to ask the Sensei Patrick here. When exactly...
Okay, well, if you're going to ask, then just please make it quick, because I think we've got to...
when, in their opinion, exactly the war was finished? Because they mentioned that the Soviet Union invaded the Korea, South Korea after the war. So I would like to hear from their voices when the war was finished and when the Soviet Union entered. And one more thing, I'm sorry, Mr. Kaze and Mr. Fukushima, as a foreign correspondent living here for almost 35 years, I feel offended by your pretension to teach us history. I did study history very much, and what you said about Japan that never did things like the Roman did in Carthago is Bakarabuzo.
Okay.
You did it in the same Jidai.
Yeah,
let's
let's just go to the questions.
And burn down your own villages.
Let's just go to the questions. We don't need a speech. Okay? Please, keep some decorum.
When I see
Please keep some decorum. They have a right to say what they want to say. You may not agree with it, but you should allow them to speak. Okay? And you don't need to make a speech. Thank you.
はい、質問でございます。先ほど終戦後にソ連が侵略したというお話があって、北方領土を取ったというお話をされたんでございますが、皆様のご認識では、戦争が終わった時期はいつなんでございますでしょうか。
戦闘というかですね、戦闘が終わったのが8月15日、昭和天皇様が終戦の消直というのを出しまして、それで、戦闘が終わった。そして最終的にミズリー号で降伏文書の調印が終わったところが一つあれですね。それから厳密に言いますと占領、アメリカ軍の占領が終わって主権回復が終わったというね、昭和27年の、4月28日こういうのも主権回復の日と完全にそこで戦争が終わったというね、いうことになります。どこで戦闘の問題、戦闘行為というのは基本的に8月15日ですね、昭和20年。
So in regard to your question, the actual fighting ended on August 15th because the Showa Emperor issued an edict requiring all of his troops to stop fighting. Of course, you could extend that date a little bit longer if the interpretation could be that the end of the war officially ended when there was a signed document on ship Missouri. When the Japanese government signed a document saying that they were surrendering. But another interpretation could be that the war truly ended in April 28th, 1952, when the occupation forces decided to leave Japan. 最後にこちら言っておりましたことなんでございますが、私自身も外国特派員としまして35年以上日本にいますので、お二方が日本についての知であるとか、日本の歴史を知らないとか言われるのは非常に私は屈辱的に思うということでございます。そして書きたごみたいなようなことはその日本の歴史になかったというお話もではなかったという話もありましたんですが、やっぱり戦国時代にもおいても似たようなことがあったのではないかと私は強く思いますが、
それで一つだけ言っておきます。戦国時代で城攻めとかやってそこのところを全滅とかそういうのがありますけど、それはもう数から言ってもね、ヨーロッパやネイティブアメリカンとかアボリジニとか、そういった、あるいはヨーロッパやアメリカのそういう歴史とは全く違います。戦争の中で数の問題考えてみてください。戦争の中で人が殺されることはありましたけれども、虐殺とかそういった意味でのあれは全く戦国時代を全く理解してないと申し訳ないけれども、もっと勉強していただきたいと思います。
So just one last comment, which is that during the Sengoku Jidai or feudal times, yes, there were cases, as I've said earlier, for example, when troops surrounded an enemy castle and they basically just killed everyone in that castle. Again, many people died during wars, on the battlefields. But the idea of sort of bringing together all people and destroying an entire village or eradicating an entire peoples, the kind of things that happened in European history or with Native Americans or with the Aborigines. If you look at European history and you look at Japanese history, and you see the numbers of people that were killed in what we might call a massacre. The numbers are totally different. So please take that also into consideration.
Yes, but
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry,
And
sorry,
on that note,
sorry. He did not
we'd like to
answer
end-
the question. Can I have the answer? My answer was, my question was, when the war ended and when Soviet Union entered Hokkaido. Can I have this answer from them?
Come on, it's
For
enough.
Christ's sake.
Yeah, then if you're not happy, then you can moderate next time. Anyway, thank you very much.
So this is history. Something we established ourselves.
Anyway, as is our usual custom, we'd like to give Mr. Nishima a membership. And then since Mr. Kase is a member, we will give him, as is our usual custom, a bottle of water. Anyway, thank you very much.
Jangan baca.